Okay, Hub, you're good.
Okay. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of our ShawLocal.com Bears Insider Podcast. We hope that everybody has been well. As we took a week off last week, you got to get a week or two somewhere in the summer with the holiday coming, but there is plenty to talk about this week as the Chicago Bears have begun, like most teams around the NFL, their off-season, they call them off-the-field activities. It is a phase of the workout program that did not exist last year, is under quite a bit of tension this year around the NFL. We're going to talk about that as well as all things Chicago Bears. I welcome in our Shaw Media Group sports editor, Kyle Nabors, our ShawLocal.com Bears insider, Sean Hammond. For those of you who are with us on our StreamYard link and watching the broadcast live, I apologize for being a few minutes late. That's on me. We had Kyle and Sean sitting here probably with smoke coming out of their ears because I do this to them too often, but it's good to be with you all now. And Sean, I'm going to come to you first because we were actually on a practice field yesterday, and it's been a while for that. We got to see the rookies a few weeks ago, but what was there of the veterans? The Bears, it was their second day of OTAs, but the day that it was available to the media. And it was interesting just to see, at least in terms of who was there, and we'll talk about that in a minute, see a lot of the vets back on the field for the first time in basically 5 months.
Yeah, we were out in the sunshine at Hallis Hall getting to see these guys in action. We got to see Justin Fields and Andy Dalton side by side for the first time. So, you know, there's only so much you can learn, but it's fun to see them together and interacting and throwing passes next to each other. Nick Foles was absent yesterday, but we were told that's apparently for a personal issue. He's out for a few days, but he's expected to be back. But yeah, the big story was how many guys were missing on the defensive side. Most of the starting lineup was not there. You know, these OTAs have been optional, but it's certainly unusual to see so many guys missing from them at this point.
Yeah, folks, be sure and get to ShawLocal.com for Sean's reporting as well as my column from yesterday where we detail what's going on there. But Kyle, the short version is the Chicago Bears, actually the NFLPA, allegedly on behalf of the Bears players, released a statement a month and a half ago. It was on April 15th when the first week of off-season activities being allowed to start, that due to uncertainties about the pandemic, due to the fact that the NFLPA claimed injuries were down last year, due to a lot of things, that the majority of the Bears players were not going to be participating. But in fact, of the 90 players on the roster, all but 18 were there. So number one, that statement turned out to be false. The Bears associate player rep, Patrick O'Donnell, was there. And, you know, punter probably needs the offseason activities less than anybody. But what was missing among the 18 players were 16 members of the defense, including 10 of 11 starters. The only starter out there was Roquan Smith. On the other side of the ball, the only guys missing were Nick Foles, as Sean just mentioned, and Allen Robinson. And I think we probably all would expect that Allen Robinson, while he's going to be a Bear this year, may not be the happiest camper in the world. So it makes for kind of a confusing situation right now as to what we should make out of this. We had Matt Nagy telling us at least 3 or 4 times yesterday, remember, this is voluntary, at which point we had to remind him OTAs have always been voluntary from the day they began, and the Bears have always had 95 to 100% attendance, so this is different, but it's not unique to the Bears. This is what's going on around the league right now.
Yeah, I mean, you wrote about it in your column last night, questioning whether it's really about health and safety or about the CBA. And I mean, let's not beat around the bush. It's about the CBA. We're at the point of the pandemic that it's the working conditions are safe. Probably an NFL practice facility is one of the safest places you can be. These professional teams are going above above and beyond to keep their players safe. And I completely understand why the Players Association would take this tack, with the next round of negotiations coming up. But it's kind of silly to me to act like it's anything but that.
Well, and what's really interesting, Kyle, and you are correct in how you say it, but there's a lot of nuance here. There's no negotiating to be done. This is now year one of a new 10-year collective bargaining agreement. What the owners did was negotiate with the players last year because they wanted to be able to create certain safety protocols to allow these guys to play. But at the end of the day, the owners don't have to agree to anything with the players, and the players can say, well, OTAs are voluntary, and they are, but they're only going to hurt themselves and their teams, by staying away. Sean, I can't for the life of me. We are journalists. I did do a lot of research before more than I wanted to when I started to write that column last night, because I was trying to figure out how the NFLPA can claim that injuries were down last year and that it's safer not to do this off-season work. There isn't a statistic I could find that didn't make it clear that injuries, and more concerningly, serious injuries where players were helped off the field, were up over the first half of the season last year by 16%. And over the course of the entire season, they were up. Against any 5-year average, they were up. And then we get to the quality of play last year, the first 4, 5, 6 weeks of the season. Everybody agreed that the quality of play was off. You can't rewrite history here. And so what you've got is an NFLPA union leadership, I'm not faulting the players for this, who've done an awful job for their players ever since Demir Smith was first elected in 2010. The last 10-year CBA was a total cave-in, and this one was a little bit worse. And so now they're constantly swinging from behind, trying to find ways to claim that they're doing good things for the players. And they're claiming that by not participating in this stuff, they're making it safer for the players. But Sean, I can't find any evidence to back that up.
Yeah, and the guy I feel most bad for in this situation, at least in Chicago, is Sean Desai, trying to figure out what to do with his defense and get these things implemented, and he doesn't have any of his starters there to do any of it. And we should say that Matt Nagy told us yesterday and says that all these guys are participating in their virtual meetings, that they're doing the off-the-field things that they need to do in order to prepare, but they're not there in person, and they're not they weren't there yesterday, and presumably they won't be there next week either, at least some of them. And another interesting tidbit that we got yesterday was Nagy said that he did speak to Eddie Goldman in person. So, from the sounds of it, it sounds like Eddie Goldman was at Halas Hall at some point, unless Matt Nagy went to go find him somewhere. But he was not. He was among those who were not participating. So that's an interesting one because he's a guy who we haven't seen in over a year now.
Hub, I've been trying to figure it out, and I think the NFLPA leadership, as you said, it's kind of been browbeaten in these last 2 CBAs, right? But I feel like there has to be a little bit more on the bargaining table of what they're trying to accomplish with this, other than just to say, hey, we're doing something to defend you guys. Like that is, it's so flimsy and it's so easy to see through. You would think that would you'd run such a high risk of that backfiring with the players. If this is the best you can do, you know what I mean? Like, this is the one thing you're going to stand up for, then what's the point?
Well, Kyle, that's the puzzling part about all this, is that it is so easy to see through and such a joke that you try and figure out what the end game is.
Right.
And I just don't know. Guys, again, I don't even have to be as old as I am to have experienced this, but after Demir Smith got the job, those first, I can't remember now if he got the job in 9 or 10. I think I said it was 10, but it was shortly after Gene Upshaw, who was actually a good friend of mine, sadly passed away really unexpectedly from cancer that no one knew that he had. And there was a process before Smith got the job, but he was the guy leading up to, I believe it had to be 09, because I know this new CBA was 11, and we went to those Super Bowls in 2009 and 2010, and he ran around beating himself on the chest and saying, we're not going to give these guys a blank check. If the owners don't open their books, there isn't going to be a new deal. They were at that time getting somewhere between 53 and 55% of total football revenue. Well, sure enough, once it came time to cave, Smith gave them 47% of new. He gave back literally 8 to 10% of the revenue that they had, and claimed that they had gotten other gains in the pension and healthcare, and they may have gotten some small gains there. But now he comes back 10 years later and does another deal where he doesn't get any of that back. He has cost the players literally hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. They've gained nothing in terms of any of the other things that they were looking for. And I'm not sure, what they expect to get out of this. And that's what's so frustrating about it. So, listen, is this going to mean that the league isn't as good? We don't know what impact this has on injuries yet. But Kyle, I don't understand how you can claim that working out less somehow protects players more. It just that part, it's not even intuitive. There's no way to make sense out of it.
Yeah, I'd like to dig into the data. Maybe that's something we can do this summer here. The coming up with story ideas on the live stream where we kind of go back. I'd like to see the data for injuries last year, but also compare it back to that 2011 lockout year, because if you remember, that was probably early August, mid-August, they got into training camp once they finally got that CBA, and it was a mad sprint to get ready for the regular season. Kind of would like to see that data and see if we can point out to anything injury-wise to see if there's anything there.
Yeah, don't quote me on this, but my memory is usually pretty good, and I believe that injuries were up 43% during the 2011 season following the lockout. That's a number that I have in mind. I know they were up, but I don't know if I've actually got the right stats there for you. We do want to thank our great sponsor, Heinz Lumber Yards. They've got 11 locations around Chicago. If you have contracting needs, if you're thinking about an addition on the house or just any of that handiwork you want to do, make sure you get to the closest Heinz Lumber near you. Again, 11 locations around Chicagoland. And we want to thank everybody who is with us live via YouTube, via StreamYard, via Twitter, however you are joining us. If you have questions, get them in there. And Kyle, they don't let me touch this because I'd blow the whole thing up. I have broken every computer, every piece of software I ever had, but that's why Kyle's the boss. He's our group sports editor at Shaw Media, and he will get your questions up if you want to put them in queue. And Sean, I'll come back to you, and then we'll check with Kyle to see if we have any questions yet. But you touched on it. I feel awful for Sean Desai. I don't know what the young man is supposed to do at this point. It's not just Sean Desai. You've got a new defensive line coach. You've got 2 new linebackers coaches. You've got a new safeties coach, or I guess he's assistant secretary. I'm not sure what Mike Adams' title is. And they don't have any of the guys they need to work with. It's not just those 10 starters I mentioned. And by the way, Sean, I don't know how the transcription came through, but Matt Nagy did in fact say that Eddie Goldman was in the building at Hallis Hall. I know for a fact, according to impeccable sources, that at least 6 of those 10 starters that were not on the field yesterday are going to Hallis Hall to work out, use the facilities there. And why do you think that is? Because it's safer than anywhere else. That's the irony of all this. Is what businesses do we know of that were as successful in combating the virus last year and conducting business as usual as well as the NFL was? And so, let's let the NFLPA stuff go for now. Who knows, why this is going on? But it is unfortunate. Again, I think we have to be clear here, though. It is going on in all 32 NFL cities. As a matter of fact, the Indianapolis Colts are done already. They had players come in for a couple of weeks. They said, you know what, we want to go hard in training camp. When it gets real, go home. They've already sent them on summer vacation. The Bears have got OTAs next week, veteran mini camp the week after that. They don't get their summer break until I believe it is June 16th or 17th. And so this is not unique to the Bears, but this is going to impact all 32 teams. And I think in the Bears case, with the new defensive coaching staff, the new coordinator, they're probably going to, at least have more catching up to do than most.
Yeah, I believe that June 17th is the last day for the Bears this month, and you might as well work out in the facility. You're right, Hub. I mean, it's the safest place to do it, and not all these guys have their own gyms, and while a lot of them certainly can afford to get all their own equipment, it's safer to do it in the facility with your team and with the trainers who are you're working with and trying to get in the proper shape for the season upcoming with those guys. So why not be as close to them as possible and get some work in. And we talk about all these starters being gone. You touched on poor Chris Rumpf, the new defensive line coach, was out there working with 3 guys yesterday, 3 total defensive linemen. That's some one-on-one time for those guys.
Yeah, 3 defensive linemen, at least one of, and possibly 2 who won't be on the team. So yeah, you're right. I was thinking about him yesterday as we were standing out there. He's working. Now they get individual. Here's the good news. We talked about this after the draft, Kyle. I like the pick of Kairos Tonga. And he is getting personal tutoring right now.
He really is.
And I do think I think I already wrote, I think he's going to make the team. You know, he is a true backup for Eddie Goldman. And certainly it was good news to hear from Matt Nagy that Eddie Goldman was in the building. He obviously is planning on being back. Matt said that he looked great. And that is a key. You know, we never know how these guys after a year away from the game are going to do. He's young enough that hopefully it won't impact him terribly. But that should be exciting because that was one of the problems with the Bears defense last year until they re-signed John Jenkins. I think it was about week 4, week 5. They were trying to get away with Bilal Nichols on the nose. It wasn't working. He can't play there. He's not quite stout enough. Now he moved back outside in the second half of the season, showed signs that he may even be better as a 5 technique than we thought. So I'm not dogging Bilal Nichols at all. He had an excellent second half of the season, but getting Eddie Goldman back and now a true backup for him could be really significant to that defense.
Is that for me or Sean?
Whoever wants. I think I was going to you, but I probably didn't tell you. So
no, yeah, Eddie Goldman coming back would be a big boost. You know, I don't really have many concerns about this defense. It's a lot of veteran players that as long as they're studying, by the time they get into training camp, scheme wise, I think they'll be in good shape. We'll just see if they can stay healthy. But you mentioned the questions earlier, Hub. We got actually a few here. So let's go ahead and dig in, and I'm going to throw a question from Larry Murphy on the screen first.
Larry is saying, I know it's super early. I guess you can all see the question. I know it's super early, but who do you believe will be the 5 O-line starters and what receivers make it? You know, Sean, I'll go first and then let you and Kyle weigh in. I think the offensive line, at least opening day, is fairly easy to read. I expect to see Sam Mustipher at center. I expect to see Cody Whitehair at left guard and James Daniels at right guard. I expect to see Jermaine Ifedi at right tackle, and I expect to see Tevin Jenkins at left tackle. Now, you know, where that could change is they did have Morgan Moses in, I believe it was Wednesday or Tuesday of this week for a workout. He is probably at right tackle, a slight upgrade over Jermaine Ifedi. Jermaine Ifedi, by the way, looked great yesterday. I talked to him about that. And he did play well at right tackle the last 6 weeks of the season last year. But we can't ignore the fact that the reason he's a Chicago Bear is because he flamed out trying to play right tackle in Seattle and was pretty awful over the course of his 4 years, 2.5 years, which were spent at right tackle. So wouldn't be shocked if they don't sign Morgan Moses. They do continue to have cap issues, although I did read an interesting report on that we'll talk about in a few minutes. But those would be my 5 starters, Sean. Certainly Elijah Wilkinson isn't going to beat out Jermaine Ifedi. And I don't know really what other option they have at left tackle than Tevin Jenkins at this point.
Yeah, I'm with you on those 5, and I really do think that they are, you know, all in on Tevin Jenkins at left tackle. And you're right. I don't know that they have a better option at this point unless you know, they do bring somebody in off the street. You know, Jermaine Ifedi jumps on the Zoom yesterday, Hub, and I'm glad you asked him about it because it's like, that's Jermaine Ifedi's head, but who's this slim guy coming up to the podium? He looked really good. He's in great shape.
You know, one thing about Zoom, Kyle, is that sometimes they don't tell us which players we're getting, and I needed, before I put my hand up, to find out, to have somebody say Jermaine. I didn't know who the guy was. I mean, he literally looked more like a bodybuilder. And when you look at NFL tackles, even the ones in the best of shape have got some belly on them. I mean, he was ripped. He really looked impressive.
But you just reminded me of one of my most embarrassing moments in a locker room where I went to. It was preseason, so you're talking about a massive roster. I can't even remember who it was. It's been probably 8 or 9 years ago, but it was a backup tight end I was trying to find, and he was next to what I would term a very slim offensive lineman who I started talking to, who then immediately after about 3 questions goes, "These are interesting questions, but I think you want the tight end, not me." And I realized what was happening. I think the offensive line is pretty much set outside of that right tackle position. I think that's more of the open battle, and I would definitely think that Ifedi right now has a clear edge. Now, Jermaine Ifedi, as you pointed out, has struggled in the past in Seattle, struggled initially with the Bears before coming on the end of last season. I think that's the position on the offensive line that you want to watch the most closely.
Yeah, and guys, I don't want to pretend that this is harder than it is or that we're smarter than we think. Juan Castillo was quoted, I think it was a week or two ago, saying he expects Jermaine Ifedi to be a Pro Bowl right tackle. So it's a pretty safe bet. He's got him penciled in as the starter. The wide receiver question gets a little trickier because it's always a numbers game. Are they going to carry 5 or 6, maybe even 7? A lot of it depends on special teams and which of these guys can make special teams contributions. The only wide receiver on the Bears that has been with the team prior to these new additions who's made any real special teams contributions is Javon Wims. And I just now with the competition for those other spots, I can't see him making the football team strictly because of special teams. So it's going to be 5 or 6. I do think it'll be 6 because we know they're only going to carry 3 tight ends, I would think, unless a Jesper Horsted can make a case that he can be a special teams addition. And I think they're only going to carry 4 running backs. So most likely 6 wide receivers. Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney are locks. When you look at the contracts that they gave to Marquis Goodwin and Demir Byrd, I'd be very surprised if they cut either one of them. Now, Anthony Miller is still here, and I don't know who's a better option. I don't know that Demir Byrd and Marquis Goodwin are better options. I didn't understand why people were talking about Miller being released, during the offseason. There's no reason for that. So I expect, unless he has a bad camp, that Anthony Miller is going to be here. Obviously Darnell Mooney and Robinson. So that's your 5 right there. Now this 6th spot is where it gets really interesting. I've liked Riley Ridley from the day he's gotten here. They have not. Daz Newsome is going to, I believe, I'd be surprised if they don't milk this injury. I guess I'm bearing the lead here. If you read Sean's column at shawlocal.com, and I hope you did, you know that Daz Newsome broke his collarbone on Tuesday, the first day they were on the field. He's out at least 8 weeks. That's going to take him into training camp. And so it's a perfect excuse to hide him on injured reserve for a year, depending on how these other, wide receivers look. And then, you're back to Javon Wims. I've liked this Thomas Ives kids on the practice squad for the last couple of years, but I don't really see him making it. So assuming they keep 6, unless I'm forgetting anybody, Sean, I guess that's either Riley Ridley or Javon Wims.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to them, and part of the reason that they've always had Wims over Ridley is because of that special teams. The way they're able to use him on special teams a little bit more, and I guess for whatever reason Ridley has not been able to replicate that. So I would keep my eye on those 2 as we're looking at the end of the wide receiver depth chart heading into the season.
I do think it's the 2 signings, Marquis Goodwin and Demir Byrd. I really liked Marquis Goodwin a few years ago at San Francisco. I thought he was going to be a pretty solid deep threat in that offense. Injuries have really been his undoing the last couple of years. So I don't think he's a lock for the roster just because I don't know what type of athlete he is at this point. I think that's what the Bears are trying to figure out. I think he has the potential still. I mean, if he can still run, I think he's a terrific fit for this offense. I liked what I saw out of Demir Byrd in New England last year. It was a bit of hit and miss, but I kind of blame that more on the erratic play of the quarterback position in New England. But I don't think either of those guys are locked to make the roster. I guess the Bears, you have a feeling, Hub, you wrote about this, about the way they're styling their offense. And speed kills, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they seem to be wanting to maximize the upside at their wide receiver position. So maybe it's those guys if they're healthy. If Anthony Miller finally gets his act together, the upside is obviously there. I think it's going to be an open competition pretty much after Mooney and Robinson throughout this summer.
Well, and where it gets interesting, guys, and then we'll move to the next question if we have another one, is Goodwin and Byrd are both strictly slot receivers. They're both 5'9", 5'10", 175, 180 pounds. Anthony Miller is a slot receiver, but he can play outside. Darnell Mooney may be best off in the slot, but he can play outside. And then you get to Daz Newsome, who I think is intriguing, but he's probably strictly a slot receiver at the NFL level too. So while you've got this numbers game and all these bodies, The only guys you really trust outside are going to be Robinson, Mooney, and Miller, if you trust Miller, which you haven't been able to necessarily. Ridley could certainly play either spot. Wims is not going to be in the slot, but he could line up outside. But here's the other thing to keep in mind. Byrd and Goodwin, actually I should say Goodwin and Byrd, because he's the faster of the two. And again, this was kind of a fun column to do. Go to shawlocal.com. It's speed kills or something to that effect is the head on it. Only 4 guys in the history of the combine have run a faster 40 than Marquis Goodwin. Only 7 have run faster than Demir Byrd. They are both a full 1/10 of a second or more. Full 1/10 of a second or more faster than Darnell Mooney, who they raved last year so much about his speed. And Tariq Cohen is even another 1/2 of a 1/10 or 50 hundredths, however you want to do this, behind that. They are all 4.42 or faster. And so they have gone from one of the more plodding receiver groups in the league to quite possibly the fastest if they keep all these guys. And I don't think that was by accident. I think that is a focus on adjustments they're going to make to the passing game to try and now balance out the new importance they've got to put on the run game with what they've done with this offensive line and the addition of Damian Williams behind David Montgomery, Sean.
Yeah, and as a bit of an aside, I guess, I don't know about you, Hub, but I thought Darnell Mooney looked really good yesterday. I know Allen Robinson's not there, and that sort of makes him the de facto number 1 target. But he was making some really nice plays out there and showing that speed and making some nice catches in traffic too.
Yeah, I got to be honest, guys. I was so busy trying to take attendance that I didn't get to see. That's just a little side note. I don't think anybody cares, but we get out there and we have to report to you all. And normally, you expect to only have 4 or 5 guys missing, but there were enough guys missing. Try taking attendance with 90 guys, or in this case, 72 guys on a football field in perpetual motion, and then make sure you got them all. So, unfortunately, I was spending more time with that than watching. But Sean is absolutely right, Kyle. Mooney looked really good yesterday. I thought David Montgomery looked really good yesterday. Damian Williams was out there. Didn't necessarily, notice all that much. But what we did see, to your point, Kyle, is Marquis Goodwin can definitely still run. That's not the issue. I mean, he has had nagging injuries, and he opted out last year. Last year was not an injury. But that's kind of the story of his career. I don't know if he's ever played 16 games. I got to go look. I think he had one season where he did play 16 games. I know he's had a 15 and a 14, but he's also had a couple seasons where he's missed a good chunk of the season. One thing you find with these sprinters is they tend to have more hamstring and calf problems than anybody else.
Yeah. In his younger days, like I said, when he was coming up with San Francisco, I don't know if I ever thought he would be a number 1 receiver, but I thought he could be a special weapon in that offense. That would be a big boost. And, kind of want to transition as we talk about speed. You didn't just talk about the receivers in that column. And, you mentioned the speed of Justin Fields. We got a question here from Dean. Before we go into that, Louise, I see your question in here. I think we answered everything. Yeah, he asked about Daz and Jermaine Ifedi, so I think we got all of that. So I'm going to jump down to Dean Mitchell here, who has a question about some ranking from Chris Sims.
Well, right there, the credibility.
I knew the question was going to poke you a little bit here.
Well, listen, I actually liked Chris Sims as a quarterback. I was surprised that he didn't have a better career than he did. But as a broadcaster, he's all over the place, he played the game. He's obviously fairly knowledgeable, but I think he does some of this stuff just for, to get notice. But Chris Sims claims Field is the 39th rated quarterback in the NFL to start. What questions do you think are and aren't legitimate? And do you think it's an accurate? I don't know what that means. 39th rated quarterback in the NFL to start.
What I believe is Chris Sims ranked all the quarterbacks, and he probably had him as the 39th QB in the league right now, is what he's saying, which is silly.
Well, but I don't know that it means anything, because I'm guessing that he might. We know who the starters are in 28 or 30, probably 32 of the 32 teams, and so I'm going to assume he had all of them ranked ahead of Justin Fields. I don't know what to make of it. I do know that Chris Sims claimed that Trevor Lawrence was not the top-rated quarterback in that draft, so he has no credibility left. Discussing rating quarterbacks.
I think if I remember, I think Chris Sims had Justin Fields at like the very end of the first round too in his mock draft. So at least he's been consistent with this Justin Fields hate. But I think the second part of the question from Dean is the more interesting thing. The what questions do you think are and aren't legitimate when it comes to Justin Fields?
Well, guys, and I've written extensively about this over the last few years, is that any question of a rookie first-round quarterback is legitimate because 90% of these kids fail. So if we're saying, based on what we know of him and saw of him at Georgia and Ohio State, what should we be concerned about? I think that everybody keeps going back to the Northwestern and the Indiana games, where they showed him some different looks and he didn't play his best football and he made some bad decisions. But I know that Ryan Day and Matt Nagy have pointed out that one of the things they like the most about him is that the very next game, first of all, he saved those 2 games. And then the very next game following those 2 games, he had 2 of his best games of the year. So I think overall, in all the people, Sean, that I talked to leading up to the draft, GMs and personnel directors and reputable scouts, decision-making, field generalship, which is exactly what sinks most of these kids. It's what sunk Mitch Trubisky. And the only other question that I saw was about the epilepsy that nobody knew about, until about 2-3 weeks before the draft. So, but in terms of his arm talent, in terms of his physicality, in terms of his mechanics, every rookie quarterback that's ever come into the league can improve their mechanics. We know that. But he doesn't have a lot of issues with the arm slot changing all that time. His feet are good. He seems to make good decisions as to when he leaves the pocket. So I think his ability to adjust and read NFL defenses is the most legitimate question, as it is for every quarterback that comes into the league.
Yeah, that's what it's going to come down to, and we might not get a great read on that until we eventually see him play. We'll see what we can learn in training camp, but until he's out there on the field and has to process these things in a game situation, and maybe we'll get some of that in the preseason too, but we won't really have a good read on it right away. And some of those things too are, the good quarterbacks are always evolving with that and always improving. So even if it's not there right away, that doesn't mean that it can't be there in the future.
I think you hit the nail right on the head with it, Hub. I think the mechanics are really good. I don't think leadership is going to be the issue with him. I think the most legitimate concern for Justin Fields is how he's going to read the field. And you start looking at quarterbacks in his mold in the league right now. He's certainly a better passer than Lamar Jackson. I think maybe the best comp in terms of mechanically sound guy that is able to make plays with his feet and still working on improving on how to read the field is Kyler Murray. And why Kyler Murray hasn't immediately become a star where you're saying, okay, this is a franchise quarterback. I think you're happy enough with the progression of Kyler Murray that you feel like he's going to be a long-term starter in this league. And I how about you guys? I think that's a pretty good comparison when you look at where Justin Fields is at now and where Kyler Murray is after 2 years in the league.
I'm sorry, you're saying we're
I think that's a good blueprint for Justin Fields in terms of where I expect his progression to go. I think reading the field is going to be a struggle. I think he's going to get better as Kyler Murray has, and Kyler Murray has been able to make up for some of those shortcomings with his mechanics and playmaking ability.
Yeah, I mean, Kyler Murray, I don't think has nearly the arm talent that Fields does, nor does Lamar Jackson. These three are going to get lumped in a crew because the only 2 quarterbacks in the league faster than Justin Fields are Kyler Murray and Lamar Jackson. The difference is that I think any scout would tell you that Fields has a lot more arm talent, and that's why I would be encouraged. The other thing that I was thinking as you were saying that, Kyle, is that, listen, I think Mitch Trubisky got a raw deal. I still am intrigued by what may happen elsewhere. I don't understand why he took that deal in Buffalo, but he's a good athlete. He's got reasonable arm talent. The accuracy was never as it was sold to us coming out of school. But the one thing that was always a little troublesome about Mitch, beyond the fact that he has not shown that he can learn how to read the field, and that may be the reason he never makes it, is that going back to when he was drafted, and even right up until the end, and again, I really like Mitch. I thought he was a good person, a good guy. I don't want to call him a kid, but whenever we talked to him in interview settings where he was the quarterback and leader of the Chicago Bears, the way he carried himself, you always had the feeling, especially the first year or two, that he was kind of looking over his shoulder to get approval from mom or dad. You know, he was a young man who wasn't ready for the pressure cooker that he walked into. Sean, everything we've seen of Justin Fields so far, that may be the most impressive part about him. And this is something that Matt Nagy talks about constantly, is he is in complete control of himself, of the situation. He seems to know the right things to say. He can be conversational. He can surprise you with the quality of his answers sometimes. And that's not something you get from a lot of rookie quarterbacks.
No, and I think the last time we talked to him on Zoom, I think there was one answer where he reeled himself back and said, let me rephrase that, to make it sound better or whatever, and changed his answer to something. And he's very, whereas Mitch was somewhat robotic in those settings when he's talking to the media, Justin Fields seems to know what he wants to say, and he gets to the point and says it. He's very concise, but at the same time insightful with what he's saying in these Zoom settings with the media.
Yeah, Kyle, I think robotic is a great way for Mitch. And another way that I would describe it, I needed to hear Sean to kind of clarify what I'm thinking, is that I always had the sense that Mitch Trubisky's number one focus was on not saying something wrong. Justin Fields' number one focus always seems to be on giving you a good answer to your question.
Yeah, Mitch. Justin Fields, comparatively to Mitch, is pretty much a better prospect in my book in all facets. Not that Mitch was a terrible prospect, but instinct-wise, mechanics, leadership-wise, I think Justin Fields is already well ahead of where Mitch was coming into Chicago.
Well, I mean, and even with just his 22 starts, in major college football, which would have been considered not a lot until the last couple of years, it's still almost twice the 13 starts that Mitch had, and so, yeah, he is definitely, well ahead of where he is. Guys, the quarterbacks are going to be the story all year long. There's no question about that. The other thing that I found intriguing yesterday, and let me know if we have any more questions, please.
We do, but go ahead.
All right. Well, is Andy Dalton, I thought was more relaxed and much more conversational with us yesterday than he was the first time around. We even got a few smiles out of him and one laugh when we told him that Matt Nagy loves his red hair. Different story for maybe later or a different time. Not a great story, but it was interesting. And Dalton, he didn't really want to say too much of anything the last time we talked to him, but this time, you got to deal with it. Ask point blank. You come here to be the starter, and then they go draft Justin Fields. How do you feel about it? And so there's 2 points I want to make here. Number one, he said, you know what? He said, I got a 1-year deal. I am the starter right now. Why shouldn't they draft a quarterback? Now we're going to compete, and we'll see. He didn't seem, I believed him when he said he was completely unfazed by it. This is not comparable in any way to the Mike Glennon situation, even though they signed Dalton for the same reason they signed Glennon. They certainly hoped to get their quarterback this time. They knew they were going to get Trubisky last time. It is intended to be a 1-year bridge. But Dalton said, hey, nobody broke any promises to me. I'm fine with it. And then a little later on, to a different question, Sean, when asked about how he would work with Fields, he said, hey, I've played a lot of ball. I've been in this league a long time. Quarterbacks work together. He said, part of my job is to help him, and part of his job is to help me. He said, I think he's a really good guy, and we're going to be fine. He said he loved the room. He told us last time that him and Nick Foles have known each other since they played high school ball against each other back in Texas back in the day. And so I still don't think Andy Dalton is anything more than a game manager or necessarily a very good quarterback. He wouldn't have been my choice. But I was very impressed with how he carried himself and how the Bears seem to be set up in that room right now.
Yeah, Coach Nagy seems to be really enjoying what they got going in there with Dalton and Foles and the way that they're interacting with Justin Fields. And by all accounts, Justin is exactly, maybe, we could expect them to say that he's doing the right things at this point, but that's, what Nagy said, that he's doing the right things and asking the right questions. And they're starting to see that, analytical mind working in the quarterback room, and as they're watching film and studying this stuff and implementing the offense for a rookie. And that's the other thing to keep in mind. Justin Fields, while Andy Dalton's been around a long time, Fields and Dalton are both new to the Bears and new to this offense and Matt Nagy, and they're learning this together a little bit. And I think it will be sort of fun to watch and see, at some point, if Justin Fields comes into the ball game, what is Andy Dalton's reaction going to be? How supportive are these guys going to be of each other? I think that will be a fun dynamic to watch when that time comes.
Let's be real. I'm pretty confident that Andy Dalton is going to be just fine whenever Justin Fields takes his starting job, because Andy Dalton has reached the point of his career where a team paid him good money to come in here on a 1-year deal. Probably wasn't going to get that money from many other teams. Let's say he starts 3, 4, 5 games, and as long as he doesn't torpedo out there, he's going to continue to find team that will employ him the next few years. And you know what I mean? Like, this isn't the worst case scenario for Andy Dalton. He knew what he was getting into. He took good money. And he's probably going to be a guy that's going to be a backup around the league, that veteran present for another 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
Well,
sorry. I was just going to mention the parallel to Ryan Fitzpatrick and what we saw with him getting benched for Tua. That worked out fine for him. He got another contract and he's got another job now.
Yeah, but that was also pretty unusual.
That
he got benched for Tua and then he got the job back, which is how he earned the contract. And I was going to say, as Kyle was talking, the reality, guys, is that the only reason that Justin Fields is going to get Andy Dalton's job is if Andy Dalton's not playing well. Because if Andy Dalton is playing well and the team is competitive, there's no reason to put Justin Fields on the field. They're not going to rush this to try and make some fan happy to get him out there if in fact Dalton is playing well and the team is doing well.
What are we coining playing well? I mean, I guess that becomes the main question here. Like, if Andy Dalton is throwing the ball, going 17 for 30 for 185 yards, but they're winning every game, or winning a majority of games 16-10, is that good enough to keep going, or is Justin Fields in there at week 10?
Kyle, I don't think there's any question. And again, we don't have to, but we're going to continue to remind people. It was Matt Nagy who was the offensive coordinator and in charge of the plan to develop Patrick Mahomes. He didn't know at the start of that year or during that year that he was going to leave to take over the Bears the next year. He was the guy in charge. And Patrick Mahomes' butt was glued to the bench until week 17. And he only got off week 17 because they were resting Alex Smith for the playoffs. The Chiefs were
Alex Smith.
Yeah, but let me finish. All right, the Chiefs were a contending. They were a returning playoff team. That's what they were contending for, and that's what the Bears are. Even though they were 8-8 last year, and I'm not comparing Andy Dalton to Alex Smith. Again, I'm the guy who loves Alex Smith and doesn't like Andy Dalton. So but where I'm going here is to answer your question. Playing well is winning. If they're winning with Andy Dalton at quarterback, they're not going to put Justin Fields out there just because they hope to get more offense. So number one is playing well. And number two is even if they're just hanging around 500, but Dalton's not the reason they're losing. I think it's pretty clear, what it's going to take to get Dalton off the field. And I hope that's the case because there'd be no other reason to make the change right now.
I have a hard time envisioning actually, Sean, go ahead because I'm echoing, so I'm going to unplug this here for a second.
Yeah, Hub, when right after the draft, I'm sure Kyle remembers reading, I wrote something about when will Justin Fields start. And I went back and read some of those stories from the Kansas City Star when Nagy was dealing with Mahomes. It was really interesting and kind of jarring to read about how Patrick Mahomes is the scout team quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs. And, that's if Dalton's playing well, that's what they're going to do. I'm with Hub in this, and that I think if they're winning, that's all that matters. They're going to leave Dalton in there and wait on Justin Fields. If things go downhill, I can certainly see that changing, but it's going to be, I don't know where I'm going with this. Kyle, what do you got?
I
lost my train of thought there.
If Andy Dalton comes out and plays like Alex Smith did during that year, then Andy Dalton's going to be the starting quarterback. If they're winning because of the run game and defense, and let's say we go into that first game against Green Bay, or teams that they want to be able to be on par with when we get into January, and they feel like they don't have enough offense, I think that is enough to where they at least have to start making that consideration, unless Justin Fields just is looking terrible in practice.
Kyle, that reminded me of my other point, which was that what I was trying to say was Alex Smith was playing. He played his best season of his career that year, and he was playing near MVP level for much of the year. I know they had a losing streak there down the stretch, but I certainly wouldn't expect Andy Dalton to be playing at that level.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about them wanting to win playoff games. I think that they're going to consistently have that evaluation going in the back of their minds of watching Andy Dalton week in and week out and trying to figure out when we get to January, can we win with him? Or does Justin Fields give us a better chance? And do we need to get him on the field in time for that to find out? We're going to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I mean, guys, look at the schedule. Look at who they're going to be playing. Nothing but playoff teams. If they're winning with Andy Dalton, I don't understand how they could make the claim that Justin Fields gives them a better chance to win. They're winning. So I don't think it's as complicated as we're trying to make it. Now, we did learn something interesting yesterday that actually I'm tempted to write about. I just don't want to be writing about quarterbacks 24/7, 365. But Matt Nagy did tell us that they're developing, quote, the plan that we've heard about for these quarterbacks. And he did say that Justin Fields is going to be taking the number 2 reps and that Nick Foles is going to be taking the number 3 reps. Now, I'm sure part of that is to start to indoctrinate Justin Fields as much as possible. And obviously Nick Foles has done this, been there. So, he can still be the number 2 quarterback on game day without taking the number 2 reps. But to your point, Kyle, as you said, unless Justin Fields looks awful in practice, you're not going to see him in practice. Andy Dalton is going to be taking the number 1 reps. He's the starting quarterback. So the hope is that this is the mental aspect of the game. This is the film portion of the game. This is being on the sideline on Sunday. They know what kind of athlete he is. They know what kind of arm talent he is. I don't think he is the Bears starting quarterback this year until it becomes obvious that they are not going to the playoffs. And they're not competitive. I don't see why you would. Now, you could argue that they're winning strictly because of the defense and it's bailing the offense out every week, but we haven't seen the defense play that well since 2018. And then, Kyle, I'll give you one more example as my mic drops away from my mouth and the earplug comes out of my ear. Hopefully you've still got me. What you're suggesting, okay, we're winning, we're going to the playoffs, but we're not good enough. That's exactly what the Dolphins tried to do last year with Tua, and it backfired on them. And they had to switch back, and then they had to switch back again because Fitzpatrick got nicked up, and then Tua stayed on the field. But we're just making this a lot harder than we have to. I think if the offense is the reason that they're not winning, they'll make a change. If they're winning, I don't see why they would make a change.
Yeah. A couple points, I guess, to make there. One, I think Justin Fields is probably ahead of where Tua was, and I think Ryan Fitzpatrick is easily a better quarterback than Andy Dalton at this point.
Time out. Especially, how is Justin Fields ahead of where Tua was?
How was
Tua was I think he won a national championship at Alabama.
Tua did win, but I guess this is my own personal scouting report here. I felt that Tua needed more time to develop in terms of reading. And this is, I guess, the question with Justin Fields, right? When we talk about the mechanics and that Justin Fields is already a bit ahead because of his playmaking ability that Tua, I think he has a better chance to overcome the issue of making quick NFL reads, a better chance than Tua did. You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying. I'm not totally sure what we're basing it on. Again, Tua, undersized, not nearly the athlete that Fields is, or for that matter, a lot of other NFL quarterbacks. It's his field generalship that makes Tua.
Right.
So, but again, that's irrelevant. We'll see how Tua works out in Miami. How Fields works out here. I'm just saying, based on Matt Nagy's history with Patrick Mahomes, based on what we've seen happen with some of these other kids around the league, I'm just hard-pressed to find a scenario where Fields gets on the field, so to speak. I mean, hey, he'll get some fourth quarter cleanup duty. I think what's really intriguing at this point is, let's say it's week 3 and Andy Dalton goes down, hopefully with nothing serious, but goes down in the second quarter, and they got to put a quarterback out there. I got to believe it should be Nick Foles, but I don't know, and it was intriguing to hear. Now, again, when he said Fields is taking the reps with the number 2s, he was talking about the rest of this voluntary stuff, and I assume he was talking about training camp. So we'll see if that lasts. But as far as becoming number 1, here's the one thing we know for sure. The best way to screw up a top prospect is to put him on the field too soon. And again, not a special date. I'm not saying, plug and play opening day rookie. I'm not saying week 5, but just too soon, whatever too soon is. And I think the Bears still need more time to figure out what too soon is with Justin Fields, because so far, than talking to the kid, you haven't seen anything.
Too soon can mean a lot of different things too. It's not always the quarterback needs more time to develop. Too soon and ruining good, young, promising quarterbacks is the fact that they're getting their brains beat in behind a bad offensive line. And that's one thing we still do have questions with the Bears. We liked Tevin Jenkins, but it is going to be a rookie at left tackle that we're not completely sold on him at left tackle. We don't know about Jermaine Ifedi. That is one factor that we're not factoring in here is how good is the Bears offensive line going to be to where they feel comfortable putting Justin Fields back there to where he's not making mistakes because he's running for his life or taking too many shots.
Well, and Kyle, it's a fantastic point. Good on you, because you just raised another second part of that. It's part of what you're talking about, particularly if you're going to have a day one rookie starter at left tackle on his blind side. Because that's one of the really difficult things for NFL quarterbacks to adjust to, is feeling the field and feeling the pressure as well as seeing it. And I think, in a strange way, Sean, Tevin Jenkins, we're all pretty much convinced is there on opening day. How much of a factor is he going to be in when Justin Fields gets on the field?
Yeah, they can certainly, it's not one or the other. You do have to pay attention to Jenkins and how he's doing before you go and throw your rookie quarterback in there, because while all his coaches and his former coaches are pretty adamant that Tevin Jenkins can play left tackle, we still haven't seen a whole lot of it. We didn't see a whole lot of it in college, even though his offensive line coach down there had said that he was capable of playing left tackle and would have been their left tackle if not for some injuries. Until you see it, you don't really know. And this is another level. You're talking about the NFL. You're stepping up in competition, and I think it would be in their best interest to keep Justin Fields off the field, at least for a few weeks here, until you know what you have in Tevin Jenkins, and until you really know what Jermaine Ifedi you're going to get too on that right side, because we saw some pretty good stuff towards the end of last year, but is that going to be a long-term answer for the 2021 season?
Guys, we are running very long here. We're just about out of time. There is one more topic I want to get to. We want to again thank our sponsors at Heinz Lumber, 11 great locations around the Chicagoland area for all your building and contracting needs. We do want to thank all of you for being with us. I want to remind you, get to shawlocal.com, sign up for a subscription to Bears Insider. You're not getting the best Bears coverage available to you if you're not getting everything. And once you are signed up and a subscriber, you will get regular emails and notifications as to when news breaks and when stories go up. So we really hope that you will join us there. Of course, you can continue to read everything for free as well, or at least not everything, but a lot for free at shawlocal.com or at many of our great newspapers, the Northwest Herald.com, the Joliet Herald, DeKalb, various papers around the state. Guys, I read something yesterday, and I'm not sure where it's coming from. It's from a reputable reporter. You can get salary information in 3 different places. Overthecap.com is an excellent website. Spotrac is an excellent website. Those are available to everybody, but also through the NFLPA website. This is based on the official reading of the contracts, but their information is not updated regularly during the offseason because it changes so dramatically, and I can't find anything there yet. But I read a report yesterday that said, according to reports from the NFLPA, that post June 1, the Bears will have created about $10 million in cap space. Now, number one, it is post June 1, and I'm still not seeing any number, vaguely resembling that. So I don't know if they have to file these contracts with the league. But as of May 31st, they were still about 2 or 3 million over the cap. And so, the Kyle Fuller release, I believe, was pre-June 1, although I could be wrong about that. And I think the Charles Leno release was post-June 1, but it's not creating that much salary cap space. So this is pivotal. This is critical, because if they wanted to sign a Morgan Moses, shall we say, as an upgrade at right tackle, if they wanted to bring in another cornerback, I thought it was interesting. Desmond Trufant was on the field Wednesday. Artie Burns was not. Now, that may have something to do with the ACL and where he's at in his rehab. But in order to make any more moves, right now, the Bears don't have the money to sign their rookie draft class. That's going to cost them about $4 or $5 million bucks. But that was kind of built in all along. The way I read it was that after they signed the draft class, they were going to be pretty much at the cap. This report is now saying they could have $5-6 million to spare. I don't know if you guys, Kyle, I don't know if you've seen anything regarding that.
No, there's been a bit of discrepancy with the number all along, whether they were right at the cap or a little above it. I believe the Charles Leno post June 1 was 9.5 million, right, Sean?
Yeah, I was under the impression it was about 9 million.
Yeah, 9 million. So, I mean, if they were at the cap, you're at 9 million, and you're right, Hub, 4 to 5 million for the rookie, which have not been factored in yet. They did sign, I believe, 4 or 5 of the late round guys yesterday.
They signed everyone except for Fields and Jenkins.
Yeah, those are the big money ones that will eat up most of that cap space that we're referring to.
Well, not to interrupt, Kyle, but they will eat up all of it, because the way this works is that as you sign these players, right now the cap is based on the contracts of the 51 highest paid players on your team. And these kids in the 5th, 6th round, even though they're going to take somebody else's spot, you're only trading a couple bucks here and there.
Yeah, that's true.
It's going to be the 1st and 2nd round deals where they're not going to be replacing minimum salary guys that'll gobble all that up.
Yeah, that's a good point. But we figured that they're going to find different ways to free up a little bit of cap space. You saw that the last couple of days in Green Bay. I don't know if you guys saw that with Robert Tonyan Jr. They're tied in. It was a restricted free agent. I believe the tender was like 3.12 million or something like that. But what they did was they spread it out over 3 additional years, with those years were essentially fully voidable. But it made the cap hit more manageable for them. And there's little financial tricks like that you would expect the Bears to do to get that just enough extra money to be able to go after those remaining free agents that they might want to take a look at. And of course, Hub, we've talked about it before. The big thing is we're starting to come in pretty close to the deadline. Is it June 15th or July 15th?
July. We're talking July.
Okay, so we got a little bit more time on the Allen Robinson. Him signing an extension would obviously would be a big help to the cap. They don't need that much money, but it's probably good to get them locked up if you can, right?
Never hurts to have it.
Well, and another piece that I wrote, I think last week, guys, at shawlocal.com, whoever wants to see it, they're already set to have as or possibly even more serious cap problems next year, based on the players they'll have left under contract, how much they'll gobble up. We don't know what the cap is going to be, but we do know that they're already committed to $163 million against the cap next year, and that's only for 37 players. So, you got to add, 16 more. And even at the minimum or close to it, not the minimum, but certainly the median, you're going to gobble it all up. And that's before you make any upgrades. And so I think they need to create cap space. The worst that happens is that you create it and then roll it over to help you next year. But you are going to see some more moves in that direction. And I think part of that is going to be they're going to try and get long-term deals done with Roquan Smith and James Daniels. Well, if they don't create some cap space this year, they can't get those deals done, because they're in the 4th and 5th years of those rookie deals. Although actually Smith was the 8th player overall, so they probably could do a deal with him and even lower his cap this year without having any more cap space. But Daniels is a 2nd round pick. With what they're going to have to pay him, I don't think they gain anything by getting a deal done with him, but they certainly want to lock these guys up before they get to free agency.
Yeah, definitely.
Those are 2 guys, and maybe even Bilal Nichols as another guy who could be in line for an extension.
Well, and Nichols is definitely going to cost you cap because he was a 5th round pick. So if you're going to give him a decent deal, it's going to be interesting to do. So, Kyle, we've gone basically an hour here, and I know we're pushing our time a little bit. Are there any more questions in queue, or should we?
Well, let's do this one last one, and we'll use it to kind of frame it and wrap it up. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we'll go with CJ here.
All right. CJ, any concerns over the lack of safety depth? Any interesting safety prospects in OTAs? CJ, I'm not sure it's not the deepest position on the team. They re-signed Deion Bush. They've got Jordan Lucas, who probably makes it because he is a special teams demon. That's where he was signed away from Kansas City last year and then opted out. They've got Marquis Christian, who they signed away from the Rams last year, who is also a special teams demon. And then they also re-signed DeAndre Houston Carson. So while you don't have any young, backups, they're all middle-aged by NFL standards, and you got 4 guys with some veteran experience. I expect them actually to cut 1 or 2 of them for cap reasons as opposed to signing more. Sean, there's no young safeties on the team that I can think of, although in a pinch, certainly Jalen Johnson could move over. Trufant could move over for that. So I think they're probably pretty close to set at safety. But the bigger question in my mind is, how do you turn Eddie Jackson into Eddie Jackson again?
Yeah, that's the big question. And you're right. There's not really, a whole lot of young guys at that position. But I will be keeping an eye on Jordan Lucas, throughout the summer and into training camp. I think that's an interesting one just to see what exactly they have in him, because they really didn't get to see that last year.
Yeah, I think next year is probably the year. We were talking about them potentially taking a safety in the draft, and the Taishan Gibson signing happened. They're pretty much set at safety this year, but next year will probably be the year that they really have to look in those mid to late rounds for another safety.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. And CJ, I do understand why you would ask the question. Jordan Lucas has been under the radar because they signed him and then you never saw him. Marquis Christian came here in the season. And again, these guys are as much special teams demons as anything else. Deion Bush is one of the better number 3 safeties in the league, actually. And I was really glad to see them re-sign him. And DeAndre Houston Carson's been very versatile, and he plays some special teams too. So Taishan Gibson, I thought, was one of the best players on the field the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season last year. He certainly was in the playoff game against the Saints. So hopefully he'll play at that level. And I don't remember if he's 31 or 32. And I keep coming back to Eddie Jackson. People talk about he got paid. That had little to do with it. His play had dropped off actually half a season before he got paid. He wasn't making the impact plays that he was making earlier on. So that is huge in terms of Sean Desai getting this defense back closer to 2018. And with that, as Kyle suggested, I think we're going to call this one a podcast. Again, we want to thank all of you for joining us. We do appreciate it. We hope that you've got a subscription by now. If not, go to shawlocal.com or the App Store on your phone or iTunes. You can download a subscription to our podcast, so it comes to you automatically every week. We'll probably take another week or 2 off during the summer, but we'll let you know a week in advance this time. The last week was kind of on me. I screwed things up a little bit, as I've been known to do. But we do plan to be back next week as the Bears are back on the field with OTAs. Heinz Lumber, what a wonderful sponsor they have been for us with 11 locations throughout Chicagoland. Be sure and do some business with them if you've got any contracting or building needs. And we hope that it's summer's here, guys. It's 90s. It's a heat wave. Enjoy the weekend if you can. And we'll be back with more for you next week.